Hello again, and welcome back to another episode of Minds on Guard, where we're learning how to guard our minds against all of the manipulations, attacks, and attempts at thought and behavior control that we come under today in the 21st century. In this week's video, we are going to continue examining the process of subversion as articulated by Yuri Bezmenov during a series of lectures in the 1980s. Now, if you've not yet seen the first two videos on this topic, please go watch them as soon as you can, as they provide some important context for what we will be discussing in this video. When we last looked at the subversion process, we learned about the 4 stages of the process, which Mr. Bezmenov described in detail during his lectures on the subject. To recap, the stages are differentiated as demoralization, followed by destabilization, then crisis, and finally normalization. Each stage builds upon the previous one, where the further along in the process that any nation or group of people happens to find itself, the ramifications of the prior and current stages are what fuel the advancement of even further subversion and eventually complete collapse or replacement of a former way of life with one that is completely devoid of personal liberty, free thought, and the ability to rely on the trustworthiness of the truth. Now that is because the main target of the process of subversion is truth itself. This is accomplished in a variety of ways. In the last video on this topic, we spoke about the first stage, demoralization. Now, this stage is where all of the groundwork is laid for the eventual destruction of the fabric which holds a society together. The ways in which this happens is through targeting the core areas of society which establish the foundational moral framework that both sustain and ensure the resilience of that society, particularly when it comes to withstanding the kinds of severe psychological attack that is ideological subversion. We spoke last time about the 6 key areas of attack during the demoralization process. They are religion, education, social life, power relationships, labor and economic relationships, and law and order. What needs to be recognized in this first stage of the process is that each of these 6 areas are integral to the overall developmental environment of each and every individual. All 6 of these areas can be thought of in ways which Venn diagram on top of one another, or overlap, so to speak, with respect to the areas of life to which they attend. While all have individual distinctions, they also rely on the foundational operation of each other in order to develop a healthy, functioning society which sees the youngest minds growing into adulthood with their critical thinking capacities as fully and acutely tuned into discerning truth as possible. It is from these 6 areas that we gain our sense of right and wrong, of good and evil, of love, compassion, of justice, empathy, free will, and when all is aligned with truth, we all prosper and grow. It is these areas which the West, with respect to ways in which our societies function, has historically been so highly valued throughout modern history. The values which find their roots in the Judeo-Christian worldview and the Bible as the source text for said values and worldview have achieved the most free, prosperous, most just, and most stable societies in the history of humanity. Now, that is not to say that what we have today is perfect, not by a long shot. However, it's the principles and truths that are contained in that worldview which are the key to the effectiveness of the Western ideological system. That is what's being targeted during the demoralization process. The aim is to render all of what makes the Judeo-Christian worldview so meaningful and strong essentially meaningless, so that a different ideology based solely on human power dynamics through extreme control, indoctrination, extermination of countering ideologies, and by forcing people into slavery, both physical and mental. Now, this is what we are training ourselves to be on guard against. What concerns me greatly with respect to the process of ideological subversion is that the attacks are meant to disturb and disrupt the capacity for logical and coherent thought. This is one of the most dangerous outcropping effects of the first stage of demoralization, and it's this exact result of deep damage to critical thinking skills of a society which leads to the second stage of the process, destabilization. This process does take time to get to that point, but that is just another part of the danger. The demoralization is a slow-moving, subtle process which plays on the momentum and exploits the inertia that is already established within a flourishing society. Like we discussed last week, the subversion process is like judo, where it utilizes its opponent's natural tendencies to achieve its victory in the war for the mind. By targeting the moral framework of a society, hostile actors aiming to uproot the norms and truths of the Judeo-Christian worldview infiltrate all layers of life in order to first assimilate into the system and then slowly achieve their aims of destruction from within. The most cunning aspect is that this is all done out in the open for everyone to see, but the changes and alterations to truth and understanding of reality are so subtle that most people do not realize what is happening before it's too late. To underscore this point, we can read the words of Mr. Yuri Bezmenov. Regarding what ideological subversion is, he says that what it basically means is to change the perception of reality of every American to such an extent that despite the abundance of information, no one is able to come to sensible conclusions in the interest of defending themselves, their families, their community, and their country. A person who has gone through the process of demoralization is, quote, programmed to think and react to certain stimuli in a certain pattern. This is alluding to Pavlov and his work on stimulus response training. You cannot change their mind even if you expose them to authentic information. Even if you prove that white is white and black is black, you still cannot change the basic perception and the logic of behavior. This process, when achieved to this degree, is irreversible in the demoralized generation. In order to address the issues, the next generation must go through a type of subversion process only in the reverse. Otherwise, the process will continue through the 4 stages. Mr. Bezmenov stated in an interview regarding the state of a demoralized person, "As I mentioned before, exposure to true information does not matter anymore. A person who was demoralized is unable to assess true information. The facts tell nothing to him. Even if I shower him with information, with authentic proof, with documents, with pictures, even if I take him by force to the Soviet Union and show him a concentration camp, he will refuse to believe it until he receives a kick in his fan bottom. When a military boot crashes his balls, then he will understand. But not before that. That's the tragedy of the situation of demoralization." It's easy to see that when a person has lost their ability to deal with facts and truth, that they will have nothing from which to anchor their understanding of reality, which would lead to accurate and complete cognition of the state of the world as it is. This is what it means to be destabilized. We are speaking about worldview, about psychological and philosophical and theological underpinnings of how a person thinks about themselves and the world around them, how they're able to track and understand the various contexts in which they will find themselves. how they will relate to information and to the people that they come in contact with, how they will treat their parents and authority figures in society, how they will understand and relate to God, or if they will believe in Him at all. These areas of reality are where those 6 targets of demoralization overlap and form the fabric of understanding with which we must be acutely attuned in order to rightly parse reality. When the essential meaning and truth of all of these have been destroyed and replaced with philosophical systems which are antithetical to the necessity of truth, God, and the morality which He has coded into the fabric of reality, we are left with nothing more than the ever-shifting will of human systems which are inclined toward evil always. I suppose I should say that this is not all that we're left with. We may ask what is behind this destruction of truth and the stark clarity of our need for God. That answer is as old as sin itself. When we are destabilized and unable to discern truth such that we can maintain our connection to its source in God, we are ultimately in service to Satan. Whether you believe in the supernatural or not, the fact remains that when any person is living and choosing through the lens of a demoralized worldview, they are living in opposition to the living God and the Creator of all there is. The more it continues, the more evil is spread throughout any society. Now, this is why I see this process to be so crucial to understand, and that we be able to counteract the demoralization that we see running wild in the world today. Families are being broken, the roles of men and women are being made meaningless, people place their value in how far ahead that they can get of other people, and will use their fellow man to extract any and all amounts of narcissistic supply so that they can live according to their own selfish and sinful desires. The institutions that once were meant to safeguard and stand for the truth have all been infiltrated by forces and people who hate humanity and want to destroy anyone who stands in their way of gaining more and more power over the minds and lives of as many people as they can. Now, while Mr. Bezmenov spoke specifically about the infiltration of the Soviet style of communism into America, the process he described can be applied to the greatest battle of all time, the one between good and evil. It's in this context that I want us to think about the state of things today and do our best to self-reflect and repent of the ways that we contribute to the demoralization process. Lying, cheating, placing our will as sovereign over the will of God, these must be done away with. We need to get back to the truth. We need to see our need for Jesus. The world is already in a deep state of demoralization and destabilization. The next stage is crisis. I pray that we can all help one another avoid that fate. So until next time, stay safe, stay diligent, and stay vigilant, keeping your minds on guard.